This is a war room, not a visitor gallery. Leave. Major Ethan Cole said it loud enough for every officer around the table to hear, and quiet enough to make the insult feel controlled. The room did not move. Screens covered the walls in cold blue light, showing satellite feeds, terrain grids, mission clocks, and a mountain valley 8,000 miles away where a team was waiting for a plan that could bring them home. Commander Clara Whitaker stood near the edge of the main table with a black folder tucked under one arm, her white skin pale under the fluorescent light, her field jacket zipped halfway, her blonde hair pinned low, and a small silver-white raven badge resting above her left chest pocket. She did not look like noise. She did not look like ego. She looked like someone who had learned long ago that the most important person in a room was sometimes the one no one noticed. Ethan saw the badge, but he did not understand it. He saw the quiet posture and mistook it for uncertainty. He saw a woman standing near his operation map and decided she had wandered into a place where she did not belong. "Major," she said, her voice even, "your extraction route crosses Dry Channel at the wrong hour." A few heads turned. Lieutenant Sarah Monroe, the youngest analyst in the room, looked up from her station. The mission timer clicked downward in red digits over the main screen. Ethan kept his hand flat on the map table, covering part of the route line as if possession made him right. "The route has been cleared through official channels," he said. "This briefing is for assault planning personnel only." Clara's eyes moved past him to the map. Dry Channel cut through the valley like a harmless pale ribbon, marked safe by an updated overlay that looked clean, efficient, and dangerously simple. She had seen that kind of confidence before. It always dressed itself in straight lines. "Official does not always mean current," she said. The words were not sharp, but they landed sharply. One captain near the communications board stopped typing. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had been awake for nearly 20 hours, running route simulations, timing windows, and support calls. He had a team depending on him. He had a brother who once came home from a raid because another planner somewhere had gotten the details right. That memory made him protective. It also made him proud. "I do not need a paperwork correction 5 minutes before command review," he said. "Especially not from someone who was not on this planning cell." Clara set the black folder on the table without opening it. The sound was soft, but in the tense room it felt like a gavel. "Then you should ask why I was sent here." Ethan gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "I know why people get sent into rooms like this. To observe. To take notes. To slow down decisions already made by people carrying the weight." Clara finally looked at him instead of the map. Her expression did not change, but something colder settled behind her eyes. "Weight is not measured by who speaks the loudest, Major." The room held its breath. Ethan stepped closer to the table. "This operation involves real people outside this building. I know. Men and women who need a route that works. I know. Then leave the route to the people responsible for bringing them back." Clara looked down at the blue line crossing Dry Channel. For 1 second, the war room lights reflected across her white raven badge, turning the small bird bright against the dark fabric. Sarah Monroe noticed it. Her eyes widened a fraction, but she said nothing. Ethan did not see her reaction. He was still staring at Clara, waiting for obedience. Clara picked up a grease pencil from the edge of the table, reached across the map, and drew a small circle around Dry Channel. Not a dramatic movement. Not a challenge. Just a correction. "At 0210 local time, this channel stops being empty," she said. "The valley wind shifts down the north wall, the thermal image becomes unreliable, and your extraction window narrows by 6 minutes. That is enough to turn a clean plan into an apology." No one spoke. The mission clock continued its red count. Ethan looked at the circle she had drawn, then back at her. "Who are you?" Before Clara could answer, the door opened behind them, and Admiral Marcus Vance stepped into the room. His eyes went first to the map, then to the black folder, then to the woman Ethan had just ordered to leave. The Admiral's posture changed immediately. "Commander Whitaker," he said, calm and formal. "Good. You found the problem." Ethan turned slowly. The room shifted around him, not with noise, but with recognition arriving too late. Admiral Vance did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The way he said Commander Whitaker changed the temperature of the room more than any order could have. Ethan Cole stood beside the map table with his hands still near the route line, suddenly aware of every officer watching him pretend he had not just told the wrong woman to leave. Clara did not look at him for satisfaction. She looked at Dry Channel, at the red mission clock, at the satellite feed that kept refreshing with the same clean lie. "Admiral," she said, "the route is behind the terrain by at least one update cycle." Vance stepped closer to the table. "Show me." Clara took the grease pencil again and drew a second mark north of the channel, where the valley wall curved inward. 3 weeks ago, runoff changed the floor here. The official overlay still treats it as dry access. At night, the thermal read will flatten this bend and make it look open. It is not open. Lieutenant Monroe glanced from Clara to the screen, then began pulling a secondary terrain layer without being told. Ethan noticed that too. People were moving now, not because he had ordered them, but because Clara had named the flaw clearly enough for discipline to recognize it. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "We have drone confirmation," he said. Clara looked toward the live feed. "From high angle and clean weather. That is what we have." "Then it is not enough." The sentence landed against his pride. Ethan had built the plan around speed. Fast entry, clean timing, no wasted motion. The route through Dry Channel saved 7 minutes. 7 minutes could protect a team. 7 minutes could also betray one. He knew that, but knowing it did not make it easier to hear from a woman he had already dismissed. "You are asking me to rebuild an extraction line minutes before command review," he said. "I am asking you not to send people through a place the map no longer understands." Vance stayed silent, letting the exchange reveal more than rank could. Clara opened the black folder. Inside were printed terrain captures, time-stamped weather notes, and a narrow strip of imagery marked with a silver-white raven symbol in the corner. Monroe saw it again, clearer this time. Her fingers slowed on the keyboard. "Sir," she said carefully, "the alternate layer confirms a terrain deformation along the north wall." Ethan turned toward her. "How much?" "Enough to affect movement through the channel," Clara added quietly, "and enough to compress the extraction window." Ethan looked back at Clara. "You keep saying extraction window like you have stood over one while it was closing." The room tightened. It was not a professional question anymore. It carried the edge of memory. Clara closed the folder halfway. "I have planned more returns than departures, Major." Ethan heard the line, but he did not accept what it implied. His brother Ryan had once been trapped inside a bad clock, waiting on a route no one in the family was allowed to know. Ethan remembered the call that came after, the controlled voice, the official language, the relief that left his mother sitting on the kitchen floor because her legs had forgotten how to hold her. Since then, he had treated every extraction line like a promise made to someone's family. That was why he hated uncertainty. That was why Clara's calm felt almost offensive. "My brother came home because someone in a war room made the right call," he said. "So do not stand there and tell me I do not understand what timing means." For the first time, Clara's eyes left the map and held on his face. "Not long. Just enough." "Cole," she said softly, as if his last name had opened a file inside her memory. Ethan stiffened. "What did you say?" Vance looked between them, and something in his expression hardened into recognition. Clara did not answer Ethan. She turned to Monroe. "Pull the archived raid index for Night Harbor." The young analyst froze for half a second, then obeyed. Ethan's face changed before the screen did. Night Harbor was not a name people said casually in front of him. It was the operation his family knew only through fragments, the one that had brought Captain Ryan Cole back when everyone had already started preparing for worse news. The main screen shifted from the current map to an archive file banner. Operation Night Harbor appeared in white letters. Ethan stared at it, suddenly quiet. Clara stood beside the table, hands still, voice controlled. "You are right about one thing, Major. Someone in a war room did make the right call." The archive banner held on the main screen like a door no one in the room had expected to open. Operation Night Harbor. The words changed Ethan before anyone spoke them aloud. His shoulders stayed square, but his face lost the hard certainty that had carried him through the morning. Clara noticed. She did not soften the moment for him. War rooms did not become kinder because a name hurt. They became safer when people stopped pretending pain made them accurate. Lieutenant Monroe pulled the file with careful hands, and the screen filled with a redacted mission summary, personnel codes, route diagrams, and a rescue timeline that had once been sealed tight enough to keep families from knowing who had made which decision. Ethan stepped closer without realizing it. "That file is restricted," he said, but the protest sounded weak even to him. Admiral Vance answered from the end of the table. Not to Commander Whitaker. The room went still again. Clara kept her eyes on the map. Scroll to extraction planning. Monroe hesitated just long enough to glance at Vance. The Admiral nodded. The file moved down. Most of the names were still blacked out, but the route lines remained, old blue paths drawn across a valley not unlike the one on the current mission board. Ethan knew the shape of it from nightmares he had never admitted to having. His brother had been somewhere inside that blue line. Ryan Cole had come home with dust in his hair, silence in his throat, and a habit of staring at exits for weeks after. The family had thanked God. The Navy had sent a short statement. No one had given Ethan a name to thank. Clara pointed to a narrow bend in the old route. Night Harbor failed on timing before it failed anywhere else. The first extraction window collapsed because the terrain layer was outdated by 48 hours. Ethan looked at her. How do you know that? Clara turned a page in the black folder and placed a printed image beside the current dry channel overlay. The two valleys were not identical, but the error was. A clean route crossing ground that had stopped being clean. A clock built around a map that no longer told the truth. Because I rebuilt it, she said. The answer was quiet. It struck harder than volume. Monroe scrolled again. A line appeared near the bottom of the file, half redacted but still readable where it mattered. Revised extraction path approved by tactical planning lead. Ethan leaned toward the screen. His eyes searched the black bars, looking for the name hidden behind them, as if the past might spare him if he did not see it clearly. Vance did not spare him. Unlock planner identification. Monroe entered the Admiral's authorization. The system processed. One redaction bar vanished. Commander Clara Whitaker. Primary tactical planner. No one moved. The mission clock for the current operation kept counting down above them, indifferent to embarrassment, pride, or revelation. Ethan stared at the name. Then he looked at Clara, at the woman he had dismissed as paperwork, at the white raven badge he had seen but not understood, at the calm face of someone who had once carried his brother's life in a line of ink and never mentioned it. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Clara did not help him. She picked up the grease pencil and drew a new route beside dry channel on the current map. Red Basin adds 5 minutes, she said. But it gives the team stable terrain, cleaner timing, and a fallback point that does not depend on a false thermal read. Ethan was still staring at the old file. Ryan was on that route. Clara's hand paused, only briefly. Yes. You planned his way out. I planned a way out for the team. That distinction settled over the table like discipline. She had not saved a brother because he was Ethan's brother. She had done her job because every name on a manifest mattered equally before the first clock started. Ethan looked down. Pride had made the room smaller. Clara's work had made it wide enough for people to come home. Vance stepped toward the table. Major Cole, current mission review continues. Commander Whitaker will brief the correction. Ethan swallowed once, then removed his hand from the map. It was the first obedient thing he had done all morning. Clara moved into the space he left, not triumphantly, not slowly, simply as the person who should have been standing there from the beginning. She circled the new route, marked the timing shift, and tapped the fallback point. This is not a better-looking plan, she said. It is a more honest one. Monroe began updating the shared display. The officers around the table leaned in. Ethan stood at Clara's side, close enough to hear the steady rhythm in her voice, far enough to understand he had not earned the right to interrupt it again. The white raven badge caught the cold light once more, and this time everyone in the war room knew it was not decoration. It was a warning that quiet people sometimes carried the exits no one else could see. Clara did not raise her voice when the room finally became hers. That was what made everyone listen harder. The main screen now showed 2 routes. Ethan's original blue line through Dry Channel and Clara's revised white line curving through Red Basin. The difference looked small to anyone who did not understand terrain. 5 minutes longer. 300 yards wider. One additional turn around a ridge that seemed harmless from above. But the war room no longer trusted harmless shapes. Not after Night Harbor. Not after the name on the archived file. Lieutenant Monroe updated the shared display while Admiral Vance stood at the end of the table, arms folded, watching the correction take form. Ethan remained near Clara's right shoulder, silent for the first time since she had entered the room. He was not quiet because he had nothing to say. He was quiet because he had finally understood that the map had been speaking before he had. Clara tapped Red Basin with the grease pencil. This route costs time at the front, she said, but it protects time at the back. That matters more. A captain near communications asked, how much recovery do we gain at extraction? Clara looked at Monroe. Monroe checked the recalculated clock. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Ethan almost reacted. He knew what that meant. The plan added 5 minutes and still returned nearly 5 at the end, not by moving faster, but by removing the mistake that would have stolen them later. Clara nodded once. That is the difference between chasing the clock and owning it. The words settled across the table with clean weight. Ethan looked at the current mission roster on a side screen. Names, roles, call signs, medical notes, emergency contacts. He had stared at lists like that for years, but now they felt less like data and more like doors to kitchens, porches, birthdays, and late-night phone calls that families hoped would never come. Clara had known that before him. That was the part that humbled him most. He had assumed her calm meant distance. Now he saw it for what it was. Control earned by carrying consequences without needing applause. What about Overwatch timing? He asked, carefully this time. No challenge. No edge. Clara glanced at him, registering the change but not rewarding it. Shift by 2 minutes. Hold the window longer on the west shelf, then release only after the team clears the basin turn. Ethan nodded and wrote it down. The simple act of him taking notes changed the room more than his apology could have. Officers began moving around Clara's rhythm. Communications adjusted timing language. Air support recalculated holding patterns. Monroe marked the fallback point. Vance approved each change with short, quiet confirmations. The operation was still urgent, but urgency had stopped pretending to be speed. Clara opened another page in her black folder and placed a Night Harbor timing sheet beside the current plan. This is why I asked for the route review, she said. The same failure pattern appeared in both files. Outdated terrain, compressed extraction, false confidence. Ethan looked at the old sheet, then at the present map. And I missed it. Clara did not soften the answer. Yes. The word was not cruel. It was clean. Ethan accepted it because for once he did not need to defend himself from the truth. Why did Admiral Vance not just tell me who you were when you walked in? He asked. Clara marked the fallback point again, darker this time. Because the map should have been enough. That was the strike that reached him. Not loud. Not humiliating. Final. He had waited for rank, history, and a personal connection to make her worth hearing, when the flaw she saw had been right there under the glass the entire time. Monroe finished the update and sent the revised route to command review. The mission clock continued counting down, but the red digits no longer felt like a threat. They felt like a responsibility being met with discipline. Vance leaned toward the table. Major Cole, confirm revised planning authority. Ethan looked at Clara. The room watched again, but this time he did not feel watched. He felt measured. He straightened. Commander Whitaker has the floor, he said. His voice was steady. All route, timing, and extraction corrections go through her. Clara held his gaze for 1 second, then turned back to the map. No smile. No victory. Just work. The white raven badge on her jacket caught the screen light as she drew the final line through Red Basin, and the war room followed the mark as if the entire mission had been waiting for her hand to tell it where honesty began. The revised plan moved across the screen with a quiet confidence the original route had never earned. Red Basin replaced Dry Channel in the main display. The extraction clock recalculated. Support windows shifted. Communications language cleaned itself around Clara's corrections until the entire war room began sounding less like people defending decisions and more like professionals protecting them. Ethan Cole watched the transformation from one step behind her shoulder. That single step mattered. Earlier, he had stood in front of Clara as if the table belonged to him. Now he stood where he could see what she saw. The change was small enough that no one named it, but everyone felt it. Clara checked the route timing again, then turned to Lieutenant Monroe. Pull the last 12 minutes of terrain feed and compare it with the Red Basin overlay. Monroe moved quickly. Yes, Commander. The word carried no hesitation now. A second screen opened, showing shifting thermal patterns over pale ridges and dry channels. Clara leaned forward, studying the image without touching the table. There, she said. Monroe froze the feed. A faint distortion crossed the old route. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have alarmed a hurried planner looking for confirmation. Just enough interference to make an empty channel look safer than it was. Ethan saw it and felt the weight of every time he had trusted a clean feed because it supported the answer he wanted. That was on the live image earlier, he said. Clara nodded. Yes. I looked at it. You looked past it. Again, the truth arrived without cruelty. That made it harder to reject. Admiral Vance stepped closer. Can Red Basin hold if the obstruction expands? Clara took the grease pencil and marked a secondary break point west of the basin. Yes, if the team uses this fallback before the clock forces them to improvise. Ethan studied the mark. That puts them 300 yards farther from the primary line, and 6 minutes farther from a trap decision. He nodded, writing it down before Pride could argue. The officers around the table noticed. So did Clara, though she gave no sign that it pleased her. She did not need his humility to feel victorious. She needed the plan to work. That was the difference between ego and command. Monroe pushed the updated package to the command review channel. A green status bar crawled across the screen. Pending approval. The room became still in a new way, not frozen by tension, but held together by shared attention. Ethan's eyes drifted to the Night Harbor file still open on the side display. Commander Clara Whitaker, Primary Tactical Planner. Captain Ryan Cole appeared lower on the rescued personnel list, his name partly surrounded by redactions, but clear enough to make Ethan's throat tighten. Clara noticed where he was looking. Your brother followed instructions well, she said. Ethan looked up, surprised by the gentleness in such a practical sentence. He never told me much. He would not have been allowed to. Did he know your name? Clara paused. No. That answer did more to humble Ethan than if she had said yes. She had carried the work without recognition, watched families receive their people back, and let silence keep the operation sealed. Ethan had built a picture of courage around noise, rank, and visible command. Clara had been showing him another kind all morning. My mother used to ask who planned it, he said quietly. The Navy never told her. Clara looked at the current mission clock. Families often live with blanks we call security. And you live with them too? She did not answer immediately. On the main screen, the approval bar reached 90%. Everyone in this room does, she said. Some just learn not to make the blank bigger by ignoring what is right in front of them. Ethan accepted the correction because it was earned. The system chimed. Revised route approved. A low breath moved through the war room. Not celebration, not relief, just the sound of disciplined people receiving a better chance. Vance gave one nod. Transmit final package. Monroe sent it. The route line turned white across the operational display, clean now because it had been questioned, not because it had been convenient. Ethan turned toward Clara. He seemed ready to say thank you, but she stopped him with a look before the words could become too small for the moment. Do not thank me yet, she said. The plan still has to bring them home. He closed his mouth and nodded. That was the first time all day he understood exactly what she meant. Respect was not the apology after the mistake. It was the discipline that came before the next one. Clara faced the screen again, white raven badge reflecting in the blue light, and the war room followed her silence into the final countdown. The final countdown did not make the room louder. It made it cleaner. Every voice became shorter, every movement more deliberate, every screen less decorative and more necessary. Clara stood at the center of the war room with the revised route glowing white across the main display, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her eyes following the mission clock as if she could hear the shape of each second before it arrived. Ethan stood beside her now, not behind her out of shame and not in front of her out of pride, but close enough to support the plan without trying to own it. That position had taken him all morning to find. Lieutenant Monroe confirmed the final package from her station. Route Red Basin received by command review. Fallback point acknowledged. Extraction window updated. Admiral Vance looked toward Clara. Commander, Clara studied the terrain feed. The channel distortion was still there on the old route, sliding faintly across the thermal image like a warning that had almost been ignored. Red Basin looked slower, rougher, less impressive. It also looked honest. Hold support language exactly as transmitted, she said. No one improves the plan during panic. Ethan heard the sentence and wrote it down. It was not for the file. It was for himself. On the side screen, Operation Night Harbor remained open, its old route lines dimmed beside the current mission. Ethan glanced at his brother's name again, then forced his attention back to the live board. Clara had been right. Gratitude could wait. The plan had to work first. A communications officer raised one hand slightly. Field confirmation received. Team is adjusting to Red Basin. No one cheered. The room simply absorbed the information and kept breathing. Clara leaned closer to the map. Watch the west shelf. Monroe pulled it up. A pale ridge appeared, then the curve of the basin, then a small movement indicator following the revised line. Everything was clean because it had stopped pretending to be fast. Ethan watched the marker move away from dry channel and felt something inside him loosen and tighten at the same time. He imagined how easily his original route would have looked correct until it was too late to be useful. He imagined Clara standing in rooms like this for years, pointing at quiet errors while louder men waited for proof they should not have needed. "Commander," he said, low enough that only she heard him. "I understand now." Clara did not look away from the screen. Understanding is only useful if it changes the next decision. He nodded. "It will." The marker reached the Red Basin turn. The old dry channel feed flickered again, showing the obstruction more clearly now under the changing thermal read. Monroe looked up, eyes wide but disciplined. The channel is closing visually on the feed. Ethan stared at it. 7 minutes saved on paper would have disappeared inside that false opening. Clara only said, "Log the confirmation." Monroe typed fast. Vance's jaw set, not in anger, but in the heavy recognition of a mistake prevented by minutes. The live marker cleared the basin turn. Communications confirmed stable timing. The extraction window held. For minutes and 40 seconds remained protected on the back end, exactly where Clara said they would need them. Ethan exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. Clara did not. She stayed with the screen until the final support window locked green. Only then did she step back from the table. The room felt different around her now. Not warmer. War rooms were not built for warmth. But the air had changed from resistance to trust, and trust in that room was not a feeling. It was compliance earned through accuracy. Vance closed the Night Harbor side file, then opened a new secure entry tied to the current mission correction. "White Raven planning intervention logged," he said. Clara's eyes moved to him. "Do not make it about the badge." Vance answered quietly. "It is about the record." Ethan looked at the silver-white raven above her pocket, the symbol he had dismissed before he knew what it carried. He understood now that it did not ask to be noticed. It marked the people who noticed what others missed. The final line on the main screen turned green. Revised extraction path confirmed. The room released a low, controlled breath. Clara picked up her black folder, closed it, and looked once more at dry channel, where the original plan had almost gone to hide its mistake. "That is why we listen before the map has to prove us wrong," she said. The green confirmation line stayed on the main screen longer than anyone needed it to, but no one asked Monroe to clear it. Revised extraction path confirmed. For words that looked simple because the hard part had already happened. Clara stood with her black folder closed against her side, watching the room return to motion around the truth she had forced into the plan. Officers updated logs. Communications archived the correction. Admiral Vance signed the planning intervention with his command authorization. Ethan remained near the table, his eyes moving between dry channel, Red Basin, and the old Night Harbor file that Vance had closed but not removed from the system. The past had left the screen, but it had not left the room. "Mission package is stable," Monroe said. "No further route changes requested." Clara nodded. "Then do not touch it unless the field asks." Ethan heard the instruction differently now. Earlier, he would have called it rigid. Now he understood it as restraint. A plan did not need constant hands on it to prove someone was in charge. Sometimes command meant knowing when to stop adding yourself. Vance looked toward him. "Major Cole, post-correction review." Ethan straightened. "Yes, Admiral." The phrase sounded routine, but the weight inside it was not. A review meant the room would write down what had happened. The outdated terrain, the dismissed warning, the revised route, the White Raven intervention. It would also record who had resisted the correction before the evidence forced the issue. Ethan did not look away from that. He had spent years believing accountability belonged mostly to people beneath command decisions. Now he was standing inside his own. Clara moved toward the side table, where the black folder had first landed like a quiet verdict. Ethan stepped aside before she reached him. Not dramatically, just enough space. She noticed. "You do not have to make room for me after the room already did," she said. Ethan looked down for a second. "I should have made it before." Clara placed the folder on the table. Yes. The answer was plain, almost gentle because it refused to decorate the truth. Monroe opened the review template. Planning correction initiated at 0942. Original route through dry channel replaced by Red Basin following terrain update discrepancy. Vance added. Include Commander Whitaker's initial objection. Monroe hesitated. Ethan spoke before Clara could. Include my refusal to accept it. The room paused again, but this silence was different. It was not shock. It was respect beginning in the only place it could, with a man telling the truth about himself without being cornered. Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. Ethan kept his voice steady. I dismissed a valid route concern because I misunderstood the source. That belongs in the review. Vance studied him for a moment, then nodded. Log it. Monroe typed the words. Ethan watched them appear and felt the sentence settle into the record where it belonged. It did not destroy him. It corrected him. Clara opened the Night Harbor file again, only enough to bring up the personnel list. Captain Ryan Cole's name sat among the others, one saved life inside a larger team. Ethan looked at it without reaching for it. I thought knowing what my brother survived made me more careful, he said quietly. Clara's eyes stayed on the screen. Sometimes it makes people protective of the wrong thing. My pride. Your version of the story. That hurt more because it was precise. Ethan had protected the story where his brother came home because strong men made strong calls in rooms like this. He had not imagined the quiet woman with the white raven badge, building an exit through old terrain data while no family knew her name. Did Ryan ever ask about the planner? Clara closed the file. Most of them do not know what to ask. They remember the ride out, the medic, the first voice that says they are clear. They do not remember the person who moved a line 6 hours earlier. Ethan nodded slowly. But that line matters. Clara picked up the folder. It usually matters before anyone cares. Vance sealed the review entry and turned back to the live board. The current mission remained stable, the white route holding clean through Red Basin. For the first time all morning, Ethan did not feel the need to control the screen. He only watched it with the discipline it deserved. Clara stood beside him, not as an opponent and not as a lesson, but as the officer who had been right before the room was ready to hear it. The white raven badge caught the light once, then disappeared into the shadow of her jacket as the war room settled into its next breath. The war room did not celebrate the corrected plan. It watched it. That was how Clara knew the room had finally become useful. The white route through Red Basin held steady on the main screen, each timing marker turning green as the field updates came in. No one clapped. No one smiled too early. Men and women who understood consequences kept their voices low and their hands precise, because the work was not finished simply because the mistake had been found. Ethan stood beside the review station while Lieutenant Monroe completed the post-correction log. His earlier words were now part of the record. I dismissed a valid route concern because I misunderstood the source. He read the sentence once, then again, waiting for shame to make him want it removed. It did not. Shame had no use unless it became discipline. Clara remained near the table, black folder under one arm, eyes on the live board. Admiral Vance spoke quietly from the end of the room. Field team confirms Red Basin, turn complete. Timing stable. Monroe added, fallback point remains available. Support window holding. Clara gave one small nod. Keep the west shelf open until they clear the final marker. Ethan reached for the communications checklist, then paused. Commander, permission to update the family notification hold language? The question made the room still in a different way. Family notification language was not dramatic. It was administrative, dry, careful, and heavy. Ethan had once stood on the receiving side of those words without knowing the people who shaped them from behind closed doors. Clara looked at him. Why? He did not rush. Because the route correction changed the risk note. The family should not carry an outdated concern if the team is already past it. Clara studied him, not suspiciously, but thoroughly. Use verified language only. Yes, Commander. He moved to the side console and began editing under Monroe's supervision. It was not a heroic task. That was why it mattered. Ethan was learning that respect did not always look like stepping aside with a speech. Sometimes it looked like doing the quiet work correctly after being wrong in public. Clara watched him for a moment, then turned back to the Night Harbor archive thumbnail still resting in the corner of the screen. Ryan Cole's name was hidden again, but the space where it had appeared felt present. Vance noticed. You never requested recognition for that operation. Clara's answer came without hesitation. Recognition was not part of the task. It could have been. Then it would have belonged to the whole planning cell. Vance almost smiled, but not quite. That is why the badge found you. Clara's fingers brushed the edge of the white raven emblem above her pocket. The silver-white bird had never been polished to shine. It was worn at the wing, scratched near the edge, and almost invisible unless the light struck it directly. Ethan looked over from the console and saw it clearly now. Not decoration, not mystery for its own sake. A mark of people who carried exits in silence. The main screen chimed. Final marker reached. Red Basin route complete. Support window closed clean. The room took one shared breath, controlled but human. Monroe looked at Clara first, not Vance, not Ethan. Team is through the timing gate. Clara's face did not break open with relief. It softened only around the eyes. Log the route correction as decisive. Monroe typed it. Ethan finished the family hold update and sent it for review. Then he turned toward Clara with no audience-seeking posture, no performance in his shoulders. Commander Whitaker, he said, my brother came home because you listened to a map other people thought was finished. Today, others may come home because you did it again. I was wrong to make you prove your place in a room where your work had already earned it. The apology hung there, plain and steady. Clara looked at him for a long second. Then do not make the next quiet officer spend 10 minutes becoming loud enough for you. Ethan nodded. I will not. Vance sealed the mission correction file. The green route remained on the display like a line drawn through pride and into discipline. Clara picked up the black folder and closed the Night Harbor thumbnail with one touch. The past returned to its archive, but not to silence. This time, the room had heard what it meant. The final marker stayed green, and for the first time that morning, the war room allowed itself to become quiet without fear inside the silence. The revised route had held. Red Basin had done exactly what Clara said it would do. The support window had closed clean, the timing gate had been cleared, and the old dry channel line sat dimmed on the side display like a mistake that had been caught before it could become history. Admiral Vance stood at the end of the table, reading the mission correction summary one last time before sealing it. Lieutenant Monroe archived the route data, the terrain discrepancy, and the planning intervention under the official record. Ethan Cole watched every line appear. He did not look away when his own refusal was logged. He did not ask for softer language. The sentence belonged there because the lesson belonged there. Clara stood near the main screen with her black folder held against her side, the white raven badge catching a faint blue reflection and then fading back into the fabric. She looked smaller now that the room no longer resisted her, not because her authority had changed, but because she had never needed to fill space the way others did. She had entered with a correction. She had been ordered to leave. She had stayed long enough for the map to tell the truth. Vance closed the file. Mission correction sealed. Route review accepted. White Raven intervention confirmed. No one repeated it. The words were enough. Ethan stepped toward Clara, stopping at a respectful distance this time. Commander, he said, I owe you more than an apology. Clara looked at him. No, Major. You owe the next officer a better room. He absorbed that slowly. It was not forgiveness. It was instruction. I can do that. Then start before you recognize the badge. The room heard it, and so did he. Recognition had come too late because Ethan had waited for history to make Clara credible. The map had been enough. Her correction had been enough. Her calm had been enough. He nodded once. Yes, Commander. Monroe cleared the Night Harbor archive from the side display, but before the file closed, Ethan saw his brother's name flash for half a second among the recovered personnel. Captain Ryan Cole. A life returned by a woman his family had never known, by a route drawn in another room, by someone who accepted silence because the job mattered more than credit. He looked at Clara, and the gratitude on his face was finally stripped of pride. My mother would have wanted to know your name, he said. Clara's expression softened, but only slightly. She wanted her son home. That was the mission. The answer was simple enough to end the conversation and deep enough to stay with him for years. Vance turned toward the main board. Commander Whitaker, before you leave. Clara paused. He entered a secure command code. A hidden archive panel opened on the lower screen. White Raven Archive, pending operations. Several files appeared beneath it, each marked with a date, a route correction, and a status line that had not been fully reviewed. Monroe stared at the list. Ethan felt the air change again. Clara did not look surprised. She looked tired in a way only discipline could hide. How many? Ethan asked. Vance answered quietly. Enough that this was never going to be the last room. Clara closed her black folder and tucked it under her arm. The mission clock reset for follow-up review. The war room lights hummed overhead. Outside the sealed doors, the base would keep moving, unaware that one corrected route had opened a larger record of quiet decisions, forgotten names, and maps that had waited too long to be questioned. Clara walked toward the exit. This time, no one stood in her way. Ethan moved first, not to block her, but to open the door. She passed him without ceremony. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back at the room, at the screens, at the officers who now understood that authority did not always arrive loudly. Next time, she said, listen before the map has to prove me right. Then she stepped into the hallway, white raven badge fading into the shadow, while behind her the archive remained open, waiting for the next truth to be heard.